Okay, we are live.
Okay, awesome.
Hi, this is Debbie Lucci from William Raveis. We're a team about 35 minutes north of Boston in Andover, North Andover. We sold about 156 homes last year, about $125 million worth of real estate. And we have some team members here, Amanda Perlmutter and also Leah Cormier. And we have a guest speaker, James. And James is from Aspen. James, tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, things like that. He is a mold company. We want to talk a little bit about mold today.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. My name's James. I am a certified microbial investigator. So I'm in and out of people's homes, taking a look at, the ugly places in a house, like the basement and the attic that most people rarely go into. Our company does mold remediation. We do mold testing, asbestos testing, insulation removal and install. And we also do air duct cleaning and air duct sealing, which I'll get a little bit more into. Aspen's been around since about 2007, and we're located in Methuen, Massachusetts, right on Broadway Street.
Okay, good. So I have some questions, a lot of questions, because there's no rules and regulations on mold.
Correct.
All right. So the thing is, what I found was you can have two different mold companies or three different mold companies come in, and you can get an array of responses about what is, what's going on with the house with mold. So it's very confusing as realtors about, because we want to help our clients, tell them exactly what to do. So when you go into somebody's house, what are you looking for?
Sure. So, most of the time, like I said, I'm in the problem areas. I'm in high moisture parts of the home, like the basement and the attic. Sometimes people get mold, under sinks and bathrooms, especially. Those problems are usually related to pretty easy fixes. A lot of the times people don't have bathroom exhaust in their home, or it's just something as simple as a pipe leak. In the basement and the attic, it can be a number of things that can lead to mold. But like you said, this state, Massachusetts, requires no guidelines for contractors to follow when doing mold remediation. So it makes it really tricky and confusing for homeowners, realtors, when they're just trying to get all their facts together to fix the problem. It gets very confusing. Our neighboring state, New Hampshire, actually enforces the national guidelines, which is called the Normie CRC process to mold remediation.
Now, what is that again, James? What's that name?
It's the Normie CRC, so Normie CRC process. It's a very detailed set of guidelines to mold remediation, and it's really important to follow it. The EPA stated that it's basically the only way to warranty a mold remediation if it's an area that's affected that's bigger than a 3-by-3 foot section.
Now, why doesn't Massachusetts follow this? This is amazing that the state right next to us does.
Yeah, it's interesting. I honestly don't know why the state doesn't enforce it, but a lot of contractors do get their hands involved in it's kind of like a gray area, with mold. So they come into houses. I'm sure that as realtors, you guys have seen a white sealer in basements and attics, especially on the joists. That's almost always a red flag. It's pretty common for contractors to do that because what they do is, they don't follow the steps and there's still mold there. So they basically just paint over it with that white sealant. And that sealant is so strong that you won't even know that the mold is still there for, 3, 4, 5 years until it starts bleeding through that sealant. And then you pop up in the attic, and either your personal belongings are affected or, you're starting to see that mold coming through the sealer.
All right. So you're saying if you go up in the attic and you see a house and it's got that white, it looks like almost paint.
Yep.
Throughout the attic ceiling.
Yep.
That's almost like a temporary fix.
Exactly. We always use a clear sealer at our company, just so we can ensure, full transparency. You can't always remove the actual staining that's embedded into the building materials from the mold. So that's part of the reason why they use that white paint to just cover over it. The benefit to the clear sealer, you can still see what's going on behind it, and you can see if that stain's growing over time. So you'll know if your preventative fixes, address the problem or not.
Now, is it like a urethane? Is it waterproof?
Yes, it's waterproof. The sealer is actually so strong that if we sprayed it on the outside on the roof shingles, and it rained every day for a year straight, the water wouldn't be able to penetrate the sealer. It's a really great product. It's called 24/7 Seal, the one that we use in our shop. But they make a number of them that you can grab them at Home Depot and John Donne.
Okay, so if you don't mind, let's go through some processes. We do a home inspection, and the famous place is the attic, because the contractor's not vented the bathroom
Yep.
vent outside, so now it's venting into the ceiling. That's one, and then another one is typically water in the basement, and now there's mold that's come in on that. So I mean, if I turn around as a realtor or a homeowner and say, look, we're going to get 3 companies in here, or 2 companies, like how do you differentiate? So how do you make sure that is the right thing to do? And because the easiest thing to do would be to come in the cheapest.
Yep.
Maybe not do it right, but
yeah. So I'll go through the steps with you guys, but the way that you can really identify the scope of work that's needed, especially mold can be a problem that's not always visible in a home as well. So even though one portion of your basement's affected, the other side can still be affected by mold spores. It just hasn't had as much of a food source, whether it's moisture or water, to become visible. So a lot of the times you'll see, an apparent path of it that a leak has taken in a home, and you can see the mold staining around it. But the air and the moisture that's in the air actually takes those mold spores, which are everywhere in the natural environment, and carries them to other portions of the home, especially if you have mechanical systems like a heating system in the basement. It can really start to impact people's health and other portions. And the way that you identify what needs to be taken care of is through testing. Mold testing is very important. A lot of people try to, skip that portion and just jump straight to the remediation to save the money. But you can actually spend the money on testing, and it'll save you money during the cleaning process, because you don't need to clean the whole basement. For example, if you've tested one area and it comes back high, and then you test the other side and it comes back as no fungus, you know that only one half of the basement's affected. Some people will come into your home and say you need to clean every square inch of the basement, even if there's nothing on the other side. Sometimes that's true, but the way to, be sure is to do testing.
Now, how do you test?
Yeah, so we've taken there's a couple different ways that we take the sampling. The first one is an air sample. The air sample covers, 500 to 800 square feet, and it basically picks up the mold spores that are invisible to our eye floating around in the air. The other one is a tape sample or a swab, which generally we would take, on visual staining, and it just confirms what species of mold it is, which helps us understand where that mold stems from, whether it's soil or groundwater. But by doing so, you can also see if the same species of mold is transmitting to other portions of the home, because there's over 100,000 species of mold, and they cling to things like dust and debris. So you can get, a tape sample, for example, of some dust, and it'll say that there's one species. But if you had a water leak in the other side of the basement, it's most likely going to be a species of mold that stems from water. Generally, Stachybotrys is one that we all, read about and hear about. That's a pretty common one. But the testing is really, the best way to identify where in the home's affected, how severe it's impacting those spaces, and whether or not it's getting into the air and you're breathing it in.
Now, so you would take a swab or a tape test, even though there was like water in one section, you could take it on the other section of like the basement.
Exactly. And then that'll help us know, whether we just need to clean that corner or if we need to clean the whole space. And that can save homeowners a lot of money, because, to do remediation properly and to follow that Normie process, it's not cheap work. There's a lot of steps involved. It takes, sometimes 2-3 days to do the job correctly. And the way that contractors get that cost down is they cut corners during that process, and they present homeowners with a nice cheap estimate. But basically, they're just doing some cover-up work, and the problem's going to come back. And since the contractor has, agitated the mold, they've tried to clean it. That's when the mold spores actually try to spread. It's called the bloom effect, where they shoot their spores through the air. And those spores travel, they land on porous building materials, suitcases, things like that. Um, and then it'll start cultivating in different areas of the home. It might take some time for that to become visual, but at the end of the day, you've spent money once to fix the problem. It was never fixed; it was actually made worse, and now you're gonna, spend more money to do it right the next time. So, it's really important to get a full understanding of the scope of work before you jump right into things.
So what's more accurate, an air sample or a swab or tape test?
Probably a tape test. An air sample can help determine whether or not that problem is in the air and it's affecting your what you're breathing in. Um, but it's the swab is going to be what's telling us exactly what's going on with that physical surface, especially if it's discolored and it's in question. A lot of the times, for realtors specifically, suspicious microbial growth pops up during the home inspection. And the home inspector, he's not the one that's certified to say whether or not that's mold. And taking a physical sample of something that's suspicious is going to be the determination whether it is mold or it's just natural discoloration from the construction process.
Do you ladies have questions? Because I could go on for 30 minutes about mold. That's how bad I am. Because I'm experiencing this right now. So I've got tons of questions. So do you ladies have any questions?
I have an asbestos question.
Sure.
Somebody asked me if there's a year or a date that the popcorn ceilings and asbestos is an issue. Is
Sure.
there?
Yeah. So, they say anything before 1988 is most likely contains asbestos containing building material. It's one of those things, though, that it's still currently getting mixed into products. And if contractors buy one product that's not asbestos containing and they buy another one that could potentially be, what they do is they mix these products in the field during construction. For example, paints, certain types of caulkings, they'll mix them together and they'll use them just to use all their resources. And that's how it comes into newer construction or modern buildings. But if there's any demo that's involved in Massachusetts, specifically this state, they're pretty strict with asbestos, which is weird because they're not so with mold. In New Hampshire is the complete opposite. They're really strict with mold and they're not so strict with asbestos. So it's just one of those things. If there's anything in question, any demo being done, I always recommend to just do the asbestos sampling because then whether you're gonna hire a contractor and he's going to end up cross-contaminating your livable spaces with asbestos debris during his demo.
So how does that testing work?
Yeah, so the asbestos testing is a little bit different than mold. Generally, depending on the types of building materials in the space that's impacted, you need to take, on average, 3 to 9 samples of the building material, and they're physical samples. So you would use, a hammer or a chisel. You would try to do it in a discrete location, like behind baseboards or, underneath cabinets, whatever it is, anywhere that you can really cover up. But you try to, gather those samples. We double bag them and then we just ship them straight to a lab. Once the lab receives them, they analyze everything and then they'll send us a report. And any building material containing 1% of asbestos material is an automatic fail. So, you don't want any asbestos at all, and 1% is considered a fail. When you're dealing with mold, it all depends on the species of mold. So you can have, for example, Stachybotrys, you can only have one mold spore before it's a fail. If you have Aspergillus, depending on what the outside conditions are in comparison to the indoors, you can have 50, 60, 100 spores, sometimes even more, before it's considered a problem or a fail.
Now, there's a insulation that may have asbestos.
Yes.
Is it
called vermiculite.
Okay, so it's blown in, and what does it look like?
It almost looks like cellulose insulation. So it's small shreds. I like to think of it as very small, like wine corks. It's little pieces like this, and it looks very similar to like a cork material.
Now, like Amanda just asked, is there a certain year for that insulation, or is it just like kind of all of that?
Yeah, it's pretty standard. Anything 1988 and beforehand. Vermiculite is very easy to identify sometimes because it has a very faint hint of gold across the entire surface because of the color of it. And when the daylight hits it through the gabled ends, for example, it'll make it shine. So it's one of those things. If you do have asbestos, vermiculite in your attic, you need to contact an asbestos company to remove it. If you try to disrupt asbestos, that's when it gets airborne, and that's when you start to breathe it in. But when it's just sitting there, it's basically just doing its job as designed until it gets disrupted.
Now, is all vermiculite, did they stop using it at a certain time, or is it just, there's some that's good and some that's bad, or is it just all bad?
I'd say that it's probably all bad. I'd have to double check for you on that, but I rarely see a vermiculite in attics nowadays. Usually it's fiberglass or it's cellulose. The Mass Safe program, which a lot of people utilize in our state for their attics insulation, they almost always do cellulose blown in, unless as a homeowner you wanted something else. Then they'll go fiberglass or something else. But cellulose is typically the best, because what happens is you can blow it in just like vermiculite, and it covers every square inch of the attic space. So you don't have, air gaps or air spaces where air is going to start traveling through it, because insulation, it blocks the airflow. But if there's gaps and crevices in the installation process, it's going to affect, how reliable that insulation is and how durable it's going to be for your attic space.
Any questions, ladies? I got one. Okay. So you come in and you mitigate for mold. Now, how do you know that everything has been taken care of? Do you do any testing? Is there a waiting period? And do you have any warranties?
Sure. Yeah. So we warranty all of our work. We automatically warranty it for a full year, just because, like I said, the sealer that we apply to the mold remediation process is very strong. It's going to prevent any moisture from settling in on the surfaces we've cleaned. So we can automatically warranty it for a year. Generally, depending on where it is in the home, we make recommended changes just to prevent the problem from reoccurring. At that point, if they have been met, we can warranty things for up to 10 years as a company. The process, though, when you're dealing with mold, we do offer to all of our clients to get it tested when we finish. Some people do, some people don't. Generally, we hold our company to a standard. We also test other people's work. Dust, debris, things like that that's left behind is what's going to impact the post testing. But we always offer it to our clients. We just don't want to be the ones that test our own work. So if you wanted to hire somebody to come in and test after us, that's pretty much the only way to guarantee that the problem's gone. Unless you're dealing with a reputable company, you most likely want to do testing. It's going to be the only way that you can understand that the problem's been mitigated, especially in Massachusetts, where you can have contractors come in and just paint over everything and say it's fixed.
I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's a problem. I actually do a lot of post testing, and it'll be for companies like that. And generally, my recommendations to them are to retreat everything, but to HEPA vacuum the dust and debris, because the mold spores cling to dust and debris, and that's another way how people suffer in their homes. It's called home sickness, just from breathing in dust and debris particulates. A lot of people, some are cleaner than others. And that dust really does affect things, and the spores cling to it. So if you're breathing that dust in, you're still breathing in mold spores, or if you're remediating, you're still leaving spores behind. And the whole purpose is to try to get that spore count as close to zero as possible.
All right. So how do you do that vacuuming?
Sure. Yeah. So the Normie process, what we do, the first step is setting up containment. So the affected space, we'd seal it off so nobody's coming in or out except for the crew members. Then we set up negative air. So the negative air is basically a big air purifier. It's drawing in the air that's inside the containment, and it's ventilated outside. So it's spewing all that air directly outside. And during that process, the mold process, the spores get airborne. So that's part of the reason why we set that up. But from there, we start the demo process. So, if there's any building materials that need to be demoed, generally a porous building material like drywall that's affected by mold or carpeting needs to be demoed and replaced. You can't really clean it. So we demo those portions. Once everything's opened up and exposed, we fog the space with an antimicrobial. And by fogging it, the antimicrobial applies to every square inch. It kills, all the mold spores that might be in the air and settle on building materials. And then we use an array of tools. Generally, like in an attic or in a basement, we use wired brush to really dig at the surfaces, because the hyphae of the mold dig into the building materials, and they try to stay there. That's why that staining starts to become visual. So we try to buffer it out with wired brush. We HEPA vacuum all the dust and debris that falls from those surfaces, and then we repeat that process 3 or 4 times, as many times as needed, to really clean and get at the staining. And then we used a mixed bleach solution. A lot of homeowners, when they get mold in the bathroom or on under the sink, they use bleach to try to kill mold. Bleach actually has an enzyme that doesn't interact with mold, and it's also mostly made out of water. It's about, I think, 94 or 96% water, and mold feeds from water. So we kill the mold first, and then we use the bleach solution to buffer the staining out. That's all we use it for during the remediation process, and just try to bring back the luster of the wood. And once we've gotten the wood, as clean as we think we can get it, then we seal it and encapsulate it with that clear sealer. And then we leave the air scrubber running for a 24-hour period just to pick up any particulates that might be settling overnight. And then the next day, a crew member will come by, remove the containment, remove the equipment. And then at that point, you should be good to go, after you set that baseline for any reconstruction that you might be considering.
Okay.
So once you fix a mold, or take care of the problem, remediate it, should you send somebody back in to go check on it? I don't know, a year later, 2 years later?
Yeah. So as long as if they're still staining, then you want to keep your eye on it. I tell people every 6 months to a year, just pop in, take a peek. Sometimes taking pictures of it the day after we finish is a good thing, because then you have something to compare it to, 6 months or a year later, see if it's growing. If it's something that, is just on the drywall, for example, and we've demoed the drywall, we've cleaned everything, we followed that process, and you put, new drywall up, you don't need to check on it. As long as you're not getting water in the property, or you're taking the preventative measures to prevent the mold from reoccurring, you should have no problems. And if you do see something, I always tell people, just give us a call. We'll come back out. We'll take a look at what's going on. And if it's something that, is easily fixable, or it's something that, we need to come back to do, we'll just send a crew back ASAP to take care of it for you. But that rarely happens, especially if you meet the recommendations.
Okay, so you mitigate the mold, but there's somebody else that has to take care of the problem that caused it.
Yes. So if
Do
it's a
you
pipe,
identify that problem, or is it more like a home inspector and identifying?
yeah. So we generally try to, 9 out of 10 times it's very easy to identify the problem. Sometimes it's pretty tricky, especially if things are like pre-existing or happened a long time ago, and homeowners just covered it up and they've fixed the problems, but they've just basically painted over them, things like that. It's hard, and new homeowners involved. After a purchase and sale, it starts to become tricky getting all the pieces of the puzzle. But we do try to identify it. It's a couple different things that can cause mold. Generally, it's all moisture or water related, because that's what feeds the mold. But for example, the basement, you want to be running a dehumidifier in New England year round. It needs to be sufficient to the cubic square footage. The attic space, it's usually the ventilation, the bathroom exhaust, like you mentioned, which I see all the time, or it's the insulation just not being installed properly or not being up to code.
Leah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I'm a bit curious about if people just go in and paint the attic white and they have no idea, or new homeowners come in, they have no idea that there's mold there. How severe can that get if it goes untreated for so long?
Sure. Yeah, it can be, especially in the attic, it can become a very severe problem where almost every single attic bay is discolored and, is molded. And the reason for that is because the air is going to take every square inch of the attic. It's going to feed the mold. It's going to allow for it to cultivate, especially if there's problems like lack of insulation or improper ventilation that's giving that mold a food source. And what happens is if you have that sealer, and you notice mold starting to bleed through it, you can't just follow the same process that I described to you. There's an extra step that's added in, and it's basically the first step. Instead of doing the demo, you'd start by chiseling off all that white sealer, and to hand chisel it, it'll take multiple days with multiple guys to do so. So the most effective way of cleaning off that sealer to get behind it is by ice blasting it off. And running an ice blaster machine can become very expensive per day. So that's why it's one of the red flags that it wasn't done correctly, and you're going to be spending more money to treat it right this time around. So that's why we always use that clear sealer, so you can see what's going on. And if you have a clear sealer, you'll know which bays and which areas are affected, and it might help you versus having to chisel off all that white sealer. You might just have to chisel off one bay or two bays, let the ice machine run for a few hours versus a few days.
All right. So James, I'm going to ask you a question. Yeah.
Sure.
If I'm a homeowner here and you're not working, we're not going to say you should use your company, which probably we should use your company, but the homeowner is interviewing several different mold people. How do they know the right one to go to?
You want to make sure that the company you're choosing is following the Normie process to mold remediation. If they're not following it, there's almost no way that they're going to be able to warranty the work they're doing unless it's smaller than a 3x3 foot section. If it's a small area, then they can hire basically a general contractor to come in, because if it's such a small area, it's not going to get airborne and it's not going to spread or basically cross-contaminate the property. And then other than that, if they're just demoing a building material and tossing it out, or they're using an antimicrobial to clean, that's another thing. You want to make sure they're using an antimicrobial and not using like bleach, for example. But as long as they're doing those things and it's a small area, you should be okay. But other than that, make sure they're Normie certified, they're following the Normie process, and that they're going to be doing things the right way.
So
No.
when you say there are some states that follow the Normie guidelines and some that don't, do you mean like that every mold company in New Hampshire, for example, where they do follow the guidelines, are required to follow those guidelines? And
Yes.
Does that play into like the home buying process at all? Like, is it woven into an inspection, all of that?
I don't think it's woven into the inspection. It's a very similar process where it's suspicious microbial growth, and then you need to contact a mold investigator to come out and take a look at things. The state does require it. Whether or not the contractors follow it and you're aware that they're following it is a different story. For example, I was just in New Hampshire yesterday at a commercial location. I was going there to give an estimate, to talk about the process and the cleaning process, and the contractor was there on site. And he has no certifications for mold. He has no idea what the Normie process is. But he basically told the person who called us out that he'd be able to take care of the job and do it himself. Everything that we described that we would do, he can do too. But it's just one of those things. I mean, if it ever popped up down the road that there was remediation done and it wasn't done correctly, that can backfire on him and the seller at that point.
So do you see the certification? Do you see Massachusetts adopting this anytime soon? To me, it just seems like it's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
There's no rules and regulations at all regarding mass. And I mean, as a seller, you're really tempted. You're selling the house. You're not going to be there to go with the cheapest person.
Yeah, I do think that Massachusetts is going to adopt the guidelines. I'm not sure when exactly, but as a whole community, nowadays in 2022, more people are sustainable to allergens. More people, are sensitive to certain things in their homes. So it's become a much bigger and more severe problem than it might have been a few years ago. But the state is, they take their time with things, but they're on top of this. Mass Save, a couple other industries, they're interested in mold remediation in the process because it also impacts their work too. So, if you're going to call Mass Save in to do insulation work and there's mold in the attic, they want that mold remediated so that they know that their crew members are going to be in a safe environment when they're doing their work. And, by having contractors cut corners, it impacts state workers' health. It impacts homeowners' health. It's just one of those things that now people are more educated on it and we're understanding the impacts. I do think that the state will adopt the guidelines. I just don't know when exactly, but I'm hoping it's sooner than later because I've seen a lot of homeowners go through this process that I'm describing to you where they've spent a lot of money and, now they're calling me out to take a look at things and to finally, correct the issue.
I know, and you're going to be the bad guy. They probably don't want to hear from you at all.
Yeah, and contractors especially, they don't want to see me on their sites because they feel like we're taking money out of their pockets. But it's really not the case. We're just basically trying to help everyone. We're not going to do any of the reconstruction. We're just there to do the cleaning process. Even if the contractor wants to do the demo, that's fine. They can start by demoing things, especially if it's for example, a vacant unit where nobody's living. All the windows are open. It's well ventilated. They can do the demo. We just ask that you call us back in so that we can take a look at things, see if it's spread, see if it's gotten worse from that demo. And then we can just come in and clean the studs. I've done plenty of jobs where, people have hired their own contractors, save some money on the demo fees, and then called us in just to do the cleaning. And then their contractor jumps right back in and does the reconstruction.
Yeah, I know with my unit personally, I'm just going through this now. The mold, we call them the mold people. They're at the house now. They're going to take down all their plastic tomorrow, and this is after I had. And you might have heard of Deb Gordon.
Yep.
Okay, so she's gone in there and tested. We're waiting 8 days for the results to come back because I live in a condo and I don't want any problems down the road that, if there was mold in this unit, this is what I heard, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to have a certificate that basically says that there's, it's been tested and it's fine. And
awesome.
Yeah, you can just see down the road though, if people don't do it properly and somebody gets sick.
Yeah. That's the big thing. Everyone's sustainable to mold differently. So, I'm in people's basements and attics in the worst conditions often, and I feel totally fine. But they can't come and look at these areas with me because the second they go in there, they start feeling sick. So everyone reacts to it differently. I always tell people, just trust your body, trust your senses, because if you're having an allergic reaction or feeling, similar ways to an allergic reaction, it's most likely something triggering your system. And, if that's the case, you should trust your body. A lot of the times the other telling sign is a musty odor, which a lot of people in New England, they go into basements and they smell a musty smell and they just think that that's normal. It's really not normal. There's only two types of smells, something that's artificial or something that's degrading. Artificial would be like cologne and degrading would be that musty odor that, we all experienced.
So when people just run their dehumidifiers, is that helping at all, or is that just?
Yeah, it's helpful. It basically cuts down on the amount of moisture that can feed the mold. So you're pulling out moisture. Sometimes what I see is that people run dehumidifiers, but they're only picking up bits and pieces of their basement because it's not sufficient to the cubic square footage. So that's the big thing. You want to make sure that it's not only covering the square footage, but the cubic square footage.
Any more questions, ladies? James, thank you so much. So if people want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you? What's your contact information?
Yeah, you guys can contact me directly. My cell phone is 617-957-0045. Or you can visit our website. It's www.aspenenvironmentalservices.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today, James. We barreled a lot of questions at you. You did a good job. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, ladies. I really appreciate you letting me join.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.